Okay, so at the end of the last video, we said that we're about to move on and do our render descriptions.
And that's true. We were about to, and we still are about to, in the next video.
But here we need to go ahead and take care of a situation that may crop up where we have an object that for the most part needs to be in front of another object. But for a few frames it needs to then travel behind that object. And luckily in our particular situation we've just narrowly avoided it, and you'll see what I mean in a second. But where you maybe are following along and set up your animation, you may have hit a situation where you need one object to occlude another object. So in this video we're going to take a look at how we go about setting that up in such a way that we can still utilize our render script for rendering out those passes. So I'm going to come and set our camera to look through shot 3. And let's watch as our ball climbs the ladder. And for the most part, our ball is climbing up the ladder. And he's in front of the ladder, and he's in front of the set because we're going to render the ladder, stage, and the pool all in one pass. How clear can we see this if we switch over? Nice. So then as the ball starts jumping, he's still in front of the ladder. Still in front of the ladder. But as he begins his dive, it's highly possible that he could, around this sort of area of the animation, pass behind the ladder. Now in our case we have narrowly missed it there. But it's highly possible in your animation that he does pass behind the ladder.
Not only that, those of you that are following along, as you had your camera sweep around the ladder as the character's climbing up, you may have had the camera travel a little bit further than we did so that you're looking at your character from the other side of the ladder. And that would be another case that this would fix.
Exactly. There could be many situations in many renders where you need one object to occlude another object, but just for part of the render. We're also going to need to set this up for our first shot, whereby we have our audience. If we jump around to around this frame, we've got our audience, and they're sitting for the most part on top of our stadium. But you can see up here, the benches need to just clip in front of our audience in a couple of places. So we're going to need to use the stadium to mask out our audience when we render out our audience passes as well. So how are we going to go about doing this? Well, there's a shader, much like the Vex Shadow Matte shader allows us to render out shadows. There's a Vex Matte shader that allows us to assign that to an object, and that object itself won't get rendered out, but rather it will occlude other objects that are being rendered out, such that, say we had a sphere and a cube with this particular shader assigned. So our sphere has just a normal shader, our cube has this Vex Matte shader assigned, and the cube was to sit just in front of our sphere, cutting into a corner of our sphere. In our final render, we'd see all of the sphere where it's outside of the cube, and in our alpha channel, we'd see all of the sphere where it's outside the cube, and we'd have this area where the cube intersects cut out of both the color and the alpha channels. So let's jump over to our shop context to create this shader, and I'm going to create a Vex Matte shader. And much like the Shadow Matte, we don't actually need to make any alterations to the parameters. We can use it straight out of the box. I'm going to take this Vex Matte shader, and in order to be able to reuse our render script for setting up these situations, I'm going to simply duplicate our ladder object and also duplicate our stadium object, renaming them to ladder mask and stadium mask respectively. And I'm going to jump inside and assign the Vex Matte shader to those objects. And that means when we use our render script, when we render our character, we simply make sure that we also include the ladder mask object within that pass, and that will make sure that both the character and this masked out ladder object are included in the pass at render time. So if the character passes behind the ladder, he'll be occluded by the ladder. When we render out our audience, we'll always make sure that we put in our stadium mask object as well. However, when we render the ladder itself, we make sure that we leave out the ladder mask so the ladder mask doesn't interfere with the ladder. And when we render the stadium itself, we make sure we leave out the stadium mask. So I'm going to hunt down our ladder. So here we've got our ladder. I'm going to Control C to copy our ladder and Control V, and we're going to get this paste nodes from clipboard warnings. That's fine. We just OK through that. Everything will work out fantastically. So now we have two copies of our ladder sitting in the exact same position with the exact same parameters, and we do need to make sure now that we don't change any of our parameters. And I'm going to rename this copy of the ladder to ladder mask. And we can jump down inside, and where we've got this material slot wide on the end, we can simply bring up the material and assign the v_matte material to this object. If we hide out our ladder, we can see that we've got a special shader assigned. This is going to, if included in a render pass, occlude any other objects in that render pass. And we can do the same thing with our stadium. So I'm going to Control-C, Control-V our stadium import and rename this to stadium mask. Jump inside and assign the v_matte material to the stadium mask. If we hide out our stadium, we can see we now have this special copy of the stadium with that masking material assigned. So now if we were to include our stadium mask in any passes, it will occlude any other objects in those passes. And if we were to include our ladder mask in any passes, it will occlude any other objects in those passes. And with that, that's going to conclude the setup of these couple of special cases that we need. And in the next video, we're going to move on to set up all of our render descriptions. So thanks a lot.